They traveled to Philadelphia in hopes of making a nation out of 13 independent colonies.
Pull up here, Mr. Seaton. Mr. Madison.
Easy, men. These are hallowed halls. I signed a paper here which got us into a lot of trouble not so long ago.
The convention welcomes Dr. Franklin to its opening session.
Almost immediately, the convention mired in deep disagreement over representation.
Mr. Chairman?
Chair recognizes Mr. Madison.
Gentlemen, the moment has arrived which is to decide whether the American experiment is to survive and be a blessing to the world or not. On the one hand, we have the Articles of Confederation. On the other, we have a proposal for an entirely new kind of government. Every day, the Union grows more impotent and her people more discontent. Is this what we wish? No. If it is true, as Mr. Patterson said, that we are authorized only to amend the Articles of Confederation, then I say let us amend them out of existence.
Mr. Chairman, the chair recognizes the delegate from Connecticut, Mr. Roger Sherman.
Now look, we've got to keep the state strong. Everybody knows it's only in a small republic, like a state, that popular government works.
I think not so, Mr. Sherman. My research tells me that it is only in a large republic that good government is even possible.
Forgive me for interrupting my colleague, but, Mr. Madison, don't all authorities state that good government arises from small republics like the states?
Yes, Colonel, they do. But the states, is there good government in Rhode Island?
Well, Rhode Island is too small. It's always controlled by some faction or other.
Dr. Franklin, is there good government in Pennsylvania? Now, that's a larger state.
Indeed not, Mr. Madison. The Pennsylvania legislature is controlled by a faction which is far from just. Alas, it is also far from honest.
All societies are made up of warring factions, rich against the poor, religion against religion, race against race. A small republic, like a state, too often falls prey to one of these factions. The result? Lawlessness and oppression, especially against the minorities. It is only in a large republic with many different-minded people that no one faction can gain control. In such a republic, the liberties of all the people are naturally safeguarded. Such a republic, if it were dedicated to justice, protected by truth, and of the spirit of the people, would, I believe, last through the ages, but first it must exist.
Madison came to the convention with a plan he thought would create such a government. Virginia Governor Edmund Randolph presented the plan on May 19, 1787.
Mr. Randolph's resolution passes in committee, New York divided. The Articles of Confederation are abolished. We will now discuss other resolutions of the Virginia Plan.
Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Mr. Dickinson of Delaware.
Mr. Chairman, gentlemen, I, as well as others, see the need for a change in our form of government. But now, turning to the second resolution, I see words which, unless struck out, must kill it. Resolved that the rights of suffrage in the national legislature ought to be proportioned to the number of free inhabitants. Now I turn to you, Mr. Madison, as we may perhaps suppose that yours is the mind behind the Virginia plan. Do you mean, sir, by this clause that the large states will have more delegates in the new legislature than the smaller states?
Yes, because of their greater populations.
And this is done in order to destroy the equality of the states in the new Congress?
Most certainly not, sir. It is done that power might at last be derived from the people, Mr. Dickinson.
Well, I'm sure this form of representation appeals to Virginia and to Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, all large states. And it may appeal to the Deep South, the Carolinas and Georgia, which believe they will become large states. But the smaller states will not accept such tyranny.
We are not talking about states, but people. Are not the citizens of Pennsylvania equal to those of Delaware? Does it require 150 of the former to balance 50 of the latter? I will never confederate on Mr. Dickinson's principles. Let the small states do as they please. The rest of us will unite.
The larger states proceed as if we were blind. Now, Mr. Madison insists that the large states will never hurt the small states if we give up our equality in the Senate. But I do not trust you, sir. Let the large states do as they like. There are other recourses for the smaller states. We can find some foreign ally, someone of more honor and good faith who will take us by the hand and do us justice.
What Mr. Bedford has spoken is treason. As for myself, whatever may be my distress, I will never court relief from a foreign power.
Gentlemen, this bickering does not further our cause.
Chair recognizes Dr. Franklin.
Thank you, General. Gentlemen. The small progress we have made in these last weeks is a melancholy proof of the imperfections of human understanding. How has it happened that we have forgotten to humbly implore the Father of Lights to illuminate our understanding? During the late contests with Great Britain, we many times offered prayers for help in this very room. And our prayers were heard, and they were graciously answered. The longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. If a sparrow cannot fall without his notice, is it probable that a great nation can rise without his aid?
I hereby adjourn this convention until July 2nd, 3 days hence.
Mr. President?
Chair recognized delegate from Connecticut.
Well, we're at a place where we can't move one way or another. Do we just go home and admit we failed? Let's try a committee. Let's have one delegate from each state get together and try to figure out a compromise.
Mr. President.
Mr. Madison.
I am sensible for the need of compromise in some cases, but I am against this committee. It will merely delay us. Anything that can be proposed in a committee can just as easily be proposed right here.
Mr. President.
You recognize Mr. Dickinson.
Can it be that Mr. Madison opposes a committee because he fears that reasonable men, out of earshot of his rhetoric, will uphold equality in the Senate?
Hear, hear.
I am in favor.
Mr. President.
Chair recognized Dr. Franklin.
We are at a dead stop, Mr. Madison. It is time to compromise, sir.
Gentlemen, we have now debated the compromise report of the Grand Committee for 9 days. I, for one, have grown weary of the long-windedness of its detractors. I, therefore, call the question on the report.
Second. We are as ready to resolve the question as you are, sir.
Very well. As debated and amended, this compromise provides for a lower house which represents the states according to their population. In the upper house, each state will have 2 senators. Each senator will have 1 vote. I remind the gentleman, his vote will be binding. Massachusetts.
Massachusetts is divided, sir. What? Mr. Strong and I vote aye. Mr. King and Mr. Gorham vote no.
Very well. Connecticut.
Connecticut votes in favor of the Grand Committee's compromise.
Hear, hear.
With Massachusetts divided, New York ineligible, and New Hampshire absent, the compromise report passes in General Assembly. 5 states to 4. We've done it.
This great compromise has created a new kind of nation, one such as I had never considered. Its national government is strong and sovereign, but it has states which are also strong. Separate states, but a united people. It is neither man nor horse, but like the centaur, half of each. I don't know whether such a creature can survive in the rough and tumble of the world. But I am willing to make the hazard. I am for the compromise. I am for the United States of America.
The new government Mr. Madison described was a republic with 3 co-equal branches: legislative, executive, and judicial, empowered only by the consent of the governed. The 2 primary elements that made this new government a republic were Article 1, Section 3. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, chosen by the legislature thereof. And Article 2, Section 1, each state shall appoint a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress. While the new Constitution gave the states equal representation in the Senate, and senators were elected by the state legislatures, the House of Representatives was elected by the people, where the number of representatives each state may have was based on population. This arrangement gave the states a direct voice in the approval of cabinet officers and Supreme Court judges, in the ratification of treaties, as judges in impeachment proceedings, and in the approval of all legislation. Except in Maine and Nebraska, the Electoral College awards all the electoral votes to the candidate who wins the state. This assures that even small states have a voice in the election of the president. Were the president elected by popular vote, the republic would become a democracy, which Alexis de Tocqueville describes as the tyranny of the majority. So fearful that the new federal government might usurp the sovereignty of the states, they added a very important 10th Amendment to the Bill of Rights, which says, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people." Until the mid-19th century, the new nation progressed quite well, winning the Mexican-American War, expanding westward, repelling the invasion of 1812, building a railroad across the continent, and even surviving a civil war.
Following the Civil War, the American economy was expanding rapidly. In the closing decades of the 19th century, production rates were climbing and millions more workers were needed.
America's growth and prosperity attracted millions of immigrants who brought with them the ideas of Karl Marx, whose Communist Manifesto swept across Europe in the late 19th century.
One great all-embracing industrial union and one great all-embracing political party, and both revolutionary to the core, two hearts with but a single soul.
At the turn of the 20th century, Eugene V. Debs headed the Socialist Party. Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, both progressives, ushered in the new century and the new progressivism, which included the Federal Reserve and the 17th Amendment. The 17th Amendment changed Article 1, Section 3. Remember the grand compromise the founders worked so hard to achieve? By letting the states choose their own senators, a tension was created between the interests of the state and the interests of the federal government. This tension served as a check and balance to prevent either from becoming domineering. The 17th Amendment erased the Grand Compromise by allowing senators to be elected by the people rather than by the states, and it erased one of the fundamental principles of the Republic. When the 17th Amendment became law on April 8, 1913, the states lost their voice in the federal government, and all influence over the enactment of federal law, the appointment of cabinet officers and federal judges, the ratification of international treaties, and judgment in matters of impeachment. For nearly a century, the federal government expanded its power and control over the states. Laws such as the Federal Land Management Policy Act, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, and many more gave the federal government power to dictate actions that states must take. These power-grabbing laws often required the states to pay for their implementation. These laws became known as unfunded mandates. It's hard to imagine that senators chosen by and accountable to state legislatures would have ever allowed these unfunded mandates to become law. The Congressional Budget Office is required to send a notice to Congress when a legislative proposal includes an unfunded mandate that exceeds $50 million. Harvard University conducted a study of these notices and found that between 1996 and 2004, there were 5,269 of these notices sent to Congress. Despite the appearance of property rights groups protesting government's abuse of power, and 10th Amendment groups demanding that the federal government operate within its delegated powers, and the incredible rise of the Tea Parties and 9/12 groups, the Obama administration and the 111th Congress, led by progressive Democrats, forced into law the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, widely known as Obamacare.
Today, after almost a century of trying, today, after over a year of debate, today, after all the votes have been tallied, health insurance reform becomes law in the United States of America.
Immediately, Florida filed a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of Obamacare. 20 other states joined the suit. The Liberty Legal Foundation is challenging with a class action lawsuit that has more than 28,000 people signed up. And there are additional legal challenges now filed in more than 40 states across the nation. Study this map carefully. In the blue states, both senators voted for Obamacare. In the red states, both senators voted against Obamacare. In the other states, the senators split their votes or did not vote. 6 of the blue or purple states are among the 20 states joined in the lawsuit challenging Obamacare. Were these senators still accountable to their state legislatures rather than to their political party and to their funders, Obamacare would never have been enacted. Because the states no longer have a voice in the federal government, there is no check or balance. The federal government is running roughshod over the states and over the will of the people. The republic is hanging by a thread. Moreover, the same progressive socialist philosophy that promoted the 17th Amendment is now promoting an end to the Electoral College. When it's gone, the American Republic will be gone.
The National Popular Vote Bill would guarantee the White House to the presidential candidate who gets the most votes in all 50 states. And this is state legislation that has passed in the last 2 years in 21 state legislative houses in Arkansas, Colorado, North Carolina, Hawaii, Illinois, New Jersey, Maryland, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Maine. It's a legislation at the state level that has 1,200 state legislative sponsors, and it's now the law in 4 states that have 50 electoral votes. That's 20% of the 270 electoral votes that represents a majority in the Electoral College.
The U.S. Senate has become just one big, bad, ongoing joke. The National Conference of State Legislatures has set the unfunded mandate figure for the states at $33 billion for 2005. This, along with the budget problems they've been having for the last few years, has put states under the heel of a distant and unresponsive government. That's us. And no matter who you send to Washington, for the most part small, smart, and decent people, it is not going to change much. Because the individuals are not so much at fault as the rotten and decaying foundation of what is no longer a republic. It's the system that stinks. And it's only going to get worse because that perfect balance our brilliant founding fathers put in place in 1787 no longer exists. Perhaps then the answer is a return to the original thinking of those wisest of all men and how they intended for this government to function. Federalism, for all practical purposes, has become, to this generation of leaders, some vague philosophy of the past that is dead, dead, dead. It isn't even on life support. The line on that monitor went flat some time ago. You see, the reformers of the early 1900s killed it dead and cremated the body when they allowed for the direct election of United States senators. Up until then, U.S. senators were chosen by state legislatures, as James Madison and Alexander Hamilton had so carefully crafted. Direct elections of senators, as great and as good as that sounds, allowed Washington's special interests to call the shots, whether it's filling judicial vacancies, passing laws, or issuing regulations. The state governments aided in their own collective suicide by going along with that popular fad at the time. But can you imagine those dreadful unfunded mandates being put on the states if U.S. senators were still chosen by and responsible to the state legislatures? Make no mistake about it. It is the special interest groups and their fundraising power that elect U.S. senators and then hold them in bondage forever. The 17th Amendment was the death of the careful balance between state and federal government. As designed by that brilliant and very practical group of founding fathers, the two governments would be in competition with each other, and neither could abuse or threaten the other. The election of U.S. senators by the state legislatures was the linchpin that guaranteed the interest of the states would be protected. And so, instead of senators who thoughtfully make up their own minds, as they did during the Senate's greatest era of Clay and Webster and Calhoun, We now have too many senators who are mere catpaws for the special interest. It is the Senate's sorriest time in a long and checkered and once glorious history. I have introduced a bill that would repeal the 17th Amendment. I used the word would, not will, because I know it doesn't stand a chance of getting even a single co-sponsor, much less a single vote beyond my own.
Freedom 21 wants to help restore the Republic by reviving Senator Miller's efforts to repeal the 17th Amendment. Be sure to watch Part 2 so you can join the campaign to help restore the Republic.